That being said, though we are recording the session, just a note, this is off the record. So if there's anyone from the press in, this is an off the record event, and please, please take note. Secondly, another thing worth mentioning, this is not legal advice. This is information only. If you need legal advice, contact an attorney. If you need brokerage advice, reach out to Sandy or Brian and get that information directly from them on a one-on-one. Today, we are giving general information on all of these wonderful topics. And thirdly, Q&A, feel free to drop questions into the Q&A section down at the bottom of your Zoom screen or use the chat. You can put them in as we go. Likely we'll keep them until the end, but if they kind of pile up there, that's okay, and we'll get them at the end. And with that, we'll jump right in. So I'm joined today by two very knowledgeable individuals. Oh, we've got a hand raised already. Feel free to throw a question into the chat and we'll address that there. So as I said, I'm joined today by Sandy Coty and Brian Barber. From what I can tell, introductions I'm not sure are really necessary. I think they seem to know everyone in the business. Sandy from A&N Deringer and Brian from Willson both bring deep operational and brokerage expertise. They're going to be walking us through regulatory changes, what those mean in practice, also touching on a few questions that have come up recently, either to them or through Byte, and we're excited to have them go through all of that. As I said in my LinkedIn post and in emails out to customers, I learn from both of you every time we talk, so excited to dig in and learn more today. When we were planning for this, there was a lot of uncertainty around what exactly we would cover. As we said when we were in the green room here, I think we had one or two items on the agenda, knowing that kind of up until this last minute, we could be getting new updates that we'd go over. So we are attempting to be as up to date as possible. If something comes in while we're on the call, you may need to give us a little bit of time to review it before anyone touches on it. But with that, today we are going to cover, let me go to our agenda here, what is and may be coming next. So we'll go over Section 301, Section 338, aluminum, USMCA, Brian's bingo cards, and then Sandy and Brian will take us through CAPE and post-entry issues. And then after that, we'll go through a quick what's new in Byte and how we can help you address all of this. As I mentioned, we'll close with a Q&A. And with all of that introduction, I will hand it over to Sandy and Brian to walk us through what they've prepared for us today.
All right, thanks, Ann. So we'll start with what's in effect today, July 22nd. So Section 301 for certain products from Brazil, the CSMS was issued last night. We are looking at 25% ad valorem duty rate for goods entered for consumption or withdrawn from warehouse for consumption as of this morning, July 22nd. 25% duty rate. There's a lot of exemptions. Brian, if you want to touch a little bit on that.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think a couple things. On the water provision, right? That's something that we've seen, in earlier announcements, and then it kind of went away. It is back here with the 301 for Brazil. Of interest, it is a short time frame or tight window. It's only 8 days, and obviously that may be due to proximity, right, to some of the southern U.S. ports. But be aware there is an on the water provision. Outside that, definitely read the U.S. notes. There's a bunch of exemptions out there for like civil aircraft, pharma, 232 goods, right? So if you're paying 232, you're not going to pay the additional 25%. And of course, like humanitarian donations, we've seen this before. And then some agricultural pieces, right? Like beef, orange juice, And there's no product-specific exclusion process that we've seen quite yet.
There's also questions around whether it stacks on top of 122.
22.
We do have a few days here. Well, at least as of what we know today, 122 is expiring as of midnight tomorrow. And if you have goods that are not on the water provision, they don't meet the on the water provision, a truck shipment and air shipment, and it arrives today or tomorrow, are you subject to both? I don't know that it's been excluded. So I think as we understand it today, you would pay both.
Yeah, and I would agree with that. I think the conventional wisdom is, absent guidance and the CSMS is already out there. We don't see an exemption for stacking. So I would say there's going to be a time frame here for a couple of days where you would stack. I'd agree.
And I think, Ann, we all have to now learn going back to the old days of reading the tariff, right? Reading the U.S. notes. I mean, that's where a lot of the information lives. And I think they just published the latest updated U.S. ITC tariff. So go back to the old days, read the U.S. notes.
Yeah, revision 12 was published yesterday, so that has some updated notes in it.
Long gone are the days where you might see 2 or 3 revisions throughout the year.
Yep. I think last year we had 36, something like that.
Yeah.
Odds are we might reach that this year too. Who knows? All right, next slide.
All right, so Ann kind of made mention in the opening to my bingo cards, and I don't really have bingo cards per se, but I do sort of have a bingo joke I've been running with, right? So, normally 5 spots to connect and hit bingo. Each card usually comes with a free spot. So, we've had 122, we've got 232, 301, and now of course 338, which I don't think anyone had on their radar. So, the long-standing joke of I didn't have that on my bingo card. Well, guess what? Now we got 338, and now we have 5 with the free spot, so we've got bingo. So, really, what is 338? We saw a proclamation, or actually 3 proclamations that came out earlier this week, in which 50% additional tariffs were announced on specific imports from Canada. Really, it cites discriminatory treatment from Canada on some U.S. commerce products, including motor vehicles, alcohol, and dairy are really the ones that were cited. What is of interest in this is, while there certainly is the authority in here to, it looks like, to impose tariffs, we've never seen this used. So, one of the things out there is, could this wind up being, challenged in court? We've seen that with 122. We've seen this, of course, with IEPAs, and here is yet another, I'll say, quote unquote, untested, authority here that's being utilized to implement tariffs. One of the things that's of note, again, I said 50%, but we have an effective date potentially of August 19th. And what's interesting to me about that is, we typically haven't seen long runways getting into, any of the more recent tariff announcements. But if you look in 338, you actually have to provide, it does require a 30-day proclamation, right? So, that's out there. That gives us a date now of August 19th. And it is going to be applicable to all additional duties, taxes, and fees that are out there. So it certainly will stack. And, if you've been tracking this at all, I'll just kind of go through real quick some of the products on the list. Honey, food products, flowers are big. So if you're in the floral industry, essential oils, dough and bakery products, we're seeing vinyl tile, apparel, wood products, furniture, ice skates, hockey equipment, golf equipment. So it does run a pretty wide swath of different industries. And for context, some of the preliminary estimates that I've heard, this affects approximately $20 billion worth of Canadian exports, which would account for about 5% of exports from Canada annually is what it looks like. The one exception that we do know currently is it's not going to apply to anything subject to Section 232, so you won't see it stack on top of 232, or anything that is covered by the civil aircraft WTO agreement, with the exception, I think there's a carve out there for drones. It still would apply to drones. And one of the biggest things, and if you're watching my backdrop at all, you may see some Bills paraphernalia. I'm domiciled up here in Buffalo, and we are certainly near and dear to the northern border and USMCA. And one of the most notable things for us here along the northern border that we're seeing is the absence of a USMCA exemption here within the 338 proclamation, right? So that's of interest as we sort of track. There are quite a bit of negotiations happening right now around USMCA. So, will that change? Will it not? We're not quite sure at this stage. So, and I think next slide. Oh, actually, I'm sorry, real quick. I'll just talk about the onshoring incentive. So one of those proclamations as well, like there's a new incentive to onshore, for aluminum, right? So if you commit to expanding primary aluminum production and production facilities, I think the plans have to be submitted to the Department of Commerce to be approved, and I believe building has to actually start happening during the current administration for it to be a viable plan. So, one of the things that's out there, of course, manufacturing, right, bringing manufacturing back to the States, steel and aluminum sector, continues to be, I'll say, under scrutiny by the administration. So with that, I think, yep, there we go. So that's a good segue into USMCA, right? So we're hearing, a lot of questions around USMCA. I just want to kind of touch here on some of these bullets, what was announced as far as USMCA. So on July 1st, USTR announced that, the U.S. will not agree to sign back on to USMCA in its current form. So that basically, is a scheduled 6-year period. We knew that was going to happen. There were some early, I'll say, rumblings that it was going to be more of a renegotiation and not really just sort of a relook or revisit to it. USTR has indicated that they're going to continue discussions with Canada and Mexico to look at perceived shortcomings within the current agreement. And it's important to note, right now it's not an actual withdrawal notice, right? And I think, some of the news outlets have reported that it's a non-renewal. But, you need to understand that it's an agreement it's got a built-in review pattern and cycle and cadence. So this isn't necessarily, the whole thing falling apart. It certainly is following, I'll say the built-in protections or the built-in, I'll say, cadence of review that we saw, in the original agreement. So, why we don't think it's a crisis yet, or why I don't think it's a crisis yet, it was designed, like I said, to undergo a 6-year review period. And if they don't agree, if parties don't agree to extend it, we just get to an annual review period. So in theory, we could have, annual reviews for the next 10 years, which would, have the original term sunset on July 1st of 2036. But, I would not interpret this as an announcement or a signal to worry about it completely collapsing. You have to, be positive while USMC negotiations are happening. We know that negotiations are happening this week. And I wouldn't really signal this as a change to change sourcing strategies just yet. We know that there's a lot of time for things to shift and change here. And you got to watch the timeline, right? So as I stated, USMCA is in effect. It remains in effect. We'll get to annual reviews, and the big thing to kind of keep an eye on, I guess what I would say as a takeaway would be, any member country does reserve the right to withdraw with a 6 months notice. So if we start seeing that, then I think we get more to more of the DEFCON 1 type conversation. But for now, things are in effect, right? What changes or deficiencies could be looked to be remedied here? I think tightening of rules of origin we're going to look at, I think, or the administration is going to look at. You've got rising tariffs on non-USMCA countries. So that's increased incentives, for third-party inputs, right? So there could be tighter controls around rules of origin, really kind of focusing on North American production. I think things to be on the lookout for, potential revisions affecting qualification for duty-free treatment, sector-specific challenges or changes. Look at technical and industry-focused modifications that might emerge. We know that there's future negotiation rounds. Like I mentioned before, there's actually negotiations happening this week, I believe, with Mexico. And we understand that Canada is supposed to, conduct or resume negotiations in the short term. And what I would say at this stage from a compliance readiness perspective is keep doing what you're doing, right? Continue maintaining your USMCA certifications. That way you've got your record keeping up to par. And I'd avoid making big decisions now until we know more. So if I had three messages on USMCA at this point, just kind of to reiterate, one, it's enforced today. There's no material disruption to North American trade at this point. Number two, the process is playing out as intended, right? It was built in with a 6-year review process. So again, it's not completely signaling a collapse of the agreement. It's just following through the process. And I think, the real story here is the third takeaway is it's really modernization of the agreement. It's not really necessarily terminations. I'd expect conversations to continue around rules of origin and competitiveness for North America just as a whole. So I think that covers that slide, and we can go to the next one. So again, here's 3 or 4 on the bingo card, right? So 122 is going to be on its way out, and we are expecting more 301, as we saw with Brazil today, and more 232. So, I want to talk about some of the differences in 122, 301, and 232. I think it's important to note, 122 was originally designed to be a temporary measure, right? This was never something that was going to be designed to be permanent, 150 days unless additional congressional approval. That clock is expiring. As Sandy said, Friday will be the first day. So we wholly expect that we may be seeing a flurry of, updates and introductions of 301 potentially, on, I guess, tomorrow evening, right, Thursday night. Our speculation is that the administration is going to rely more heavily on the tried and true, 301 and 232. They seem to be a bit more durable. Again, 122 designed to be temporary. So, I think importers just need to understand that, tariffs not, it's not a risk anymore. It's more so like it's going to be there. It's a permanent thing almost at this stage. And you got to ask yourself, what products, what countries are you sourcing from, what rates, and, how quickly can our systems adapt, right? And so, looking at 122 versus 301 versus 232, 122 is very broad based, right? And from an administration perspective, for us as brokers, for Sandy and I have kind of joked that it's been my favorite thing to administer, right? Because it's just one thing across the board. There's not a lot of not a lot of exemptions. It's very easy to implement. It's very easy to train. It's very easy for importers to understand and education. But it is temporary by statute, and it does it was relatively uniform. And it's also easy to kind of track your costs, right? When you get into 301, 301 definitely targets countries, unfair trade practices. We're seeing right now it's 60 economies, that have been under investigation. That includes the EU. So the EU's got another, I think it's 27 economies or nations within that. So you're talking, we'll call it 86 countries that, are going to be or are being targeted or investigated under the guise mostly now of forced labor. We can see product level exclusions, and it can definitely remain in place for extended periods. When you get into 232, we've certainly seen that most around steel and aluminum sectors. Does cite national security authority, and like I said, it's historically around steel and aluminum, but we have seen this being expanded to more and more strategic sectors. Product definitions, derivative-based coverage, becomes critical to know. Things that typically weren't considered steel and aluminum are now being touched by these derivative provisions or annexes that are out there. And I think when you look at risks, I think with the recent 232 changes, it's not necessarily the tariff rate itself. It's often, as I've mentioned, derivatives. It's companies discovering, importers discovering that products that they never thought contain steel or aluminum are now caught up in sort of derivatives here. I think diversification in country may not deliver the expected savings that potentially was out there before. What questions should you be asking as an importer? I think you should be looking at, what countries remain under investigation, what countries could be added later, and what products are specifically identified, right? So it's all these things that kind of in your stack or your compliance stack that you're trying to look through and weed through to make sure that you understand what your total costs are. And that kind of leads into duty stacking, right? So we kind of talked a little bit earlier about, 122 laying on top of the Brazil for a couple of days. with all of these different programs being implemented, again, 122, very uniform, very easy to implement. Now you've got general duty rates, you've got 301, you got 232, you've got anti-dumping, countervailing potentially, and you have exemptions in there, right? When you look at, what's out there for the 301 rates right now, and we don't have final rates yet, is my understanding. I think we've heard proposed rates out there, 10%, right, or 12.5%. Depending on what country it's from, have been proposed by USTR. But we also have exclusions, right, or exemptions as well, right? So is it 0%? Is it 10%? Is it 12.5%? Is it a number we haven't even heard yet, right? That final number, I think, will be determined by the White House. So we're kind of waiting to see that. What I would say is you got to watch out. We've been asking, I've been hearing questions from importers about, retroactive. Can these things go retroactive? When's the tariff taking effect? Again, is there an on the water provision, right? Which we've seen in some of these either proclamations or executive orders. It kind of comes, it goes. I don't know what's in vogue this week versus last week, but keep an eye on different countries you're sourcing from. If there's on the water provisions, that certainly will it'll play a role in how you plan. Anytime there's changes, I think big risk, you've got customs audit or additional scrutiny. So whenever you got new programs, I think customs is going to be looking at country of origin, substantial transformation, valuation, your classification. I can tell you as a broker, we have certainly seen a monster uptick in requests for information and substantiating, any kind of duty-free claims. So if you're playing in the USMCA space, if you're playing in 9801, duty-free provisions and agriculture provisions, that type of stuff, certainly be prepared to substantiate those and make sure your compliance files are tight and that you're working with good partners to make sure you've got the documentation that you need. I think there's also increased pressure on origin determinations as well. Make sure you've kind of gone through those exercises. And I think, really you got to look at, some of the things to think about, what are some of the biggest unknowns? What are the scope of the future 301s? We don't know. There could be more coming. Some of the sectors that have been talked about, critical minerals often come up, pharma, semiconductors. We also have to look at, litigation outcomes, right? There's lawsuits out there still on IEPA. There's still uncertainty about whether you should file a court case or not. I think we'll talk a little bit more in some of the CAPE updates about that. And then again, relief on duty stacking, are there going to be exemptions? Are there not going to be exemptions? And I think, things that you should really think about, make sure you're reviewing your classification now. Don't wait until implementation dates are out there. You should be taking a look at your supply chain right now. You should be taking a look at your classifications, your origin, your USMCA pieces to make sure that those are tight and tidy. And I think, you've got to look at trying to recalculate your landed costs. And I think that is certainly one of the reasons why we're here, why we partner with FITE. So I think there's some good offerings and some good tools here to help the importing and the broker community. So with that, I am going to pause. I will yield to the lovely Sandy Langford-Coty for a little bit more on smelt and cast and copper, which is coming this month as well.
Yeah, so we knew the copper was coming, right? There was some indication that it was coming, but it came fast. They updated the technical document a few days ago, and it has some nuances that it's not as easy as just adding a new type. So it's a 3-digit versus a 2-digit. It's very nuanced, but it takes a lot to program for this. And Customs essentially gave us about 10 days. So that could be challenging for a lot of software vendors. So if you have copper imports, smelt and cast will be required as of today for transmissions on or after July 30th. Hopefully we can get a delay of that, but we don't know yet. Right now, the CSMS seems to indicate it only covers 4 derivative tariffs. We're not too clear on that, why it didn't include Chapter 74. Essentially, we'll find out when you try and do an entry with Chapter 74 if it rejects to say it looks for copper, but we're not quite understanding why that was so limited in scope, but a lot of work has to go into getting the system ready for this. So we could see entry rejects if our software is just not prepared by July 30th.
Yeah,
And
I
then
mean, we have.
no, go
Oh,
ahead.
I was just to say we haven't even seen this insert yet, Sandy, really to like test it all, right? So, it's of note certainly that the window here is extremely tight. Um, and I know we as a firm have questions in, uh, to trade remedy on, whether, again, Chapter 74, right? So that's a monster question that's looming out there. And as we try to run impact assessments for our customers, and I'm sure as importers are trying to do their own assessments, um, it's hard, right? It's hard when you don't have information or you're getting it very last minute to make informed choices.
Yep. So in addition, they snuck in that you no longer have to declare the additional declaration for aluminum or steel, and it's never going to be needed for copper. For the U.S. origin, right, and the Virgin Islands and all the countries that are listed here. Once again, our system isn't prepared to not send something. In the past, you had to send the country the same as the origin to bypass the edits, and now that they've gone away, now we have no way to not send it, so that causes some angst as well. So anyway, there's some nuances around 232 around melt and pour and smelt and cast.
Yeah, and what I'd say about that U.S. component too, that was, I'll say, of interest, was we saw the edit in place before we saw the messaging from CBP, right? So, the rejects were coming before we understood what was happening, right? So if anyone out there is wondering like, hey, why am I getting this reject? There since has been a CSMS, so go revisit that if needed, I guess.
Yes. All right, next slide, please. All right. I just wanted to remind you all, with all these changes, how critical time of entry is. And this is just for your reference. 14168 is where you understand all the rules around time of entry for duty calculation. All right. Generally, this is a non-issue. It's, the release date and off you go. But it catches a lot of people by surprise now, right? Does the duty go up? It's very pertinent. It depends how the entry is filed. If it's certified from summary or if it's done as a two-part, everything is fine as long as it's a release only. If it goes to an exam and a hold, you could have some issues. So understanding the nuances of how your entries should be filed, you should really become familiar with this regulation. Next slide. One of the things that catches everyone by surprise and they don't understand is the arrival of the conveyance is so critical. So we have things like a variable release window for ocean, which an entry can release 5 days prior to arrival. You can have wheels up on a flight, but it could be a different date, right? So you could get a provisional release of yesterday, but the conveyance actually arrives today. So you are really going to be paying your 301 Brazil, for example, because a conveyance came in today. People get very confused around that. They're like, well, I had a release yesterday. Yes, but that's what's called a provisional release, not the actual release. And under no circumstance can you have a release prior to the conveyance arrival. So that's E in this regulation that you really need to be familiar with. There's different rules around quota and warehouse withdrawals, and of course, immediate delivery, which is used if duties are expected to go down. So just wanted you to be aware when customs talks about goods entered for consumption or withdrawn for consumption, what you need to be really familiar with. Next slide. Then there is the IT date. This always gets people confused as well. This regulation 14169 says that the rates are in effect as per 14168 that we just reviewed, unless, there's always the unless, otherwise provided for in the executive order. That's why you have to read the language of the executive order. But in addition, it touches on warehouse entries, but more importantly, immediate transportation, ITs. If you have an IT and you don't have quota or tariff rate quota, the IT is your date of entry. But it also has to have arrived. So many people show an IT date of a week ago, but the conveyance doesn't arrive until today. you are paying Brazil duty, right? Because the conveyance arrived today, and people get very confused around that. So Brian and I have to go back every time these changes happen to verify conveyance arrival. Did I have an IT? When did it load, right? All these things, because we may have to fix an existing entry that was pre-transmitted. So a lot of work comes in after the fact to verify conveyance and actual dates of arrival. This is never an issue before, but it's become our norm for the last year and a half.
Yeah, I mean, what I would say is, anytime there's a sweeping transformation, I guess, from one program to the next, and you've got new implementation dates, we easily anticipate reworking thousands upon thousands of files, right? Just because of the amount that are, either keyed in advance, again, running down all that information, or, in the land border environment, they're keyed, and then, again, trucks cross 2 weeks later in some cases. And, each day there's just more and more releases that are falling into sort of the new regime of tariffs as opposed to, the original processing date. So, it's no small feat when you talk about systems and you talk about, rework from any of these, new large sweeping implementations.
And unfortunately, we've gotten better at it, right? I mean, there was getting a lot of additional bills because the IT date really wasn't what was shown, right? It was later, and then now your goods are subject to. In addition, just to add a little bit more caveat to this, is if you have anti-dumping and countervailing, you really have to look at the anti-dumping order to understand when the anti-dumping goes into effect. The IT probably has no bearing. So that's just an additional, good old anti-dumping comes into play with date of entry. And as next slide, please, we did talk about the on the water provision, right? It's hit with the Brazil. This one has a very tight window on the water by prior to and entered by the 29th, right? You have to read the nuances, but customs initially, we thought a feeder vessel was fine. That's a final mode. Customs in the IEPA rules said feeder vessel does not count. It has to be on the mother vessel to the U.S. And I peeled this off of their FAQs for the IEPA. If your mother vessel goes to find other ports, you're okay. But if you transload to a new vessel, that's the new date, and you may not fall within the on the water provision. So there's no dates like that come back to us. We have to query carriers' websites. We have to understand whether, what is the date of on the water. It's very difficult. It's very manual. But just wanted you to be aware. On the water is back. Next slide. All right, Kate. So just a little bit on phase one. Customs did come out with a CSMS. If you did warehouse entries or warehouse withdrawals, they said there was a lot of confusion. Folks were filing CAPE on the 21 and only the 21, which is the warehouse entry. You have to file it on the withdrawal because that's where you paid the duty. So they made a change in the programming that you can no longer file CAPE on 21. But if you did file on some and you never filed it on the withdrawal, the 31 or the 32, you have to do that because it will not give you a refund if you only filed it on the 21. And secondly, it's imperative that if your goods have all withdrawn, that you make sure that the warehouse proprietor has filed their closeout, because that's the only thing that will set the liquidation and get you your CAPE refunds, right? So a little bit nuanced, but if you play in this world, you have to make sure you did the two things. The warehouse withdrawal was filed in CAPE and that the warehouse has closed your entry so that you have a liquidation date. So phase two is recon. Recon was opened up for any entries that were not reconciled. So really the underlying entries can be filed. If they're already on recon, we don't really know yet what to do, but what's going to complicate things a lot is the actual recon, the 09, has to now match the revised entry with the CAPE IEPA tariffs withdrawn, right? So we have to rework the 09 entry to match the resulting underlying entry and how it changed. So, right, that's nuanced. That's a lot of extra work for some, depending on how their system works. So that's an additional challenge there. Brian, you want to talk a little bit about phase three?
Yeah, so phase three, not active yet, right? However, we did see a court order, right, that the CIT has said that CBP will reliquidate certain finally liquidated entries. So that's good news for importers, of course, looking because there's a lot of concern about whether or not the liquidated entries and whether or not CBP had the authority to reliquidate them. Looks like the court, of course, has said yes, reliquidate. Now the big caveat here, though, is it looks like it's limited in the decision to accounts or importers that have filed suit in court. So the big takeaway here for anyone that's considering filing a case or attaching to potentially a class action suit type thing, now would be the time certainly to talk to an attorney. Sandy and I are not attorneys, but if you need recommendations, we certainly can assist with that. But if you are considering a case, if you have significant money at stake, we would urge you to talk to an attorney at this stage.
And we still don't know about drawback that's been filed. We don't know about open protests. We don't, some people file protective protests. That's why you really need to reach out to a trade attorney. Now, what we have learned, though, you really need to look at your refund that you received versus what you expected, because many things are happening. Customs could divert, right? Maybe there was money owed on another bill, and customs diverted and took some of that money away. Further up the chain, IRS money, some other state you owed money, so that may reduce your refund. But we're seeing funny activity where customs recalculated the CAPE incorrectly. For example, if you had claimed the agricultural exemption and somehow all of a sudden they charged you for the 232 because the system kind of did something incorrectly. Your only recourse is to understand what happened, that the refund doesn't match what you expected, and file a protest to get that money back. Because once you have caped, which is now a verb, the entry, you cannot file a post-summary correction, right? That's out. It'll block you. So making sure your entries are correct before you file a CAPE, because once the CAPE is filed, you're out of any post-summary correction. Your only recourse is a protest. So we've seen that. We've seen customs miscalculate date of entry and issue a 50% on 232 when it was really at the 25% rate. So you really need to analyze and understand that your refund matches exactly what you expected.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I mean, I think that's great advice, Sandy. I mean, when you look at, your basically the way you can perfect entries, right? Obviously, there's timelines to everything. So the reason you can't file PSC right after you CAPE is because, of course, the entry gets liquidated, right? So once that happens, it's thrown out. So now you're in your protest window. Now, if the entry was liquidated, accelerated liquidation, right? Because the CAPE, basically forced the entry to be liquidated. Now your general timelines are shrinking. You still, of course, have 180 days from the date of liquidation to protest. But, if the entry wasn't ready to liquidate, it was only liquidated because you requested accelerated through the CAPE, your window may shrink a little bit. So I think it's sage advice at this point to make sure that your data is clean when you're filing these CAPEs. So, speed is not necessarily your best friend in all these cases. Precision and review and making sure that you're eliminating problems, because there have been a ton of different error messages or nuanced things that have been coming out of CAPE filing. So the cleaner your data is up front, I think the more success and the closer to your anticipated outcome you'll see.
That's a good segue, I guess, to you, Anne.
Thank you both.
I didn't even plan that one. That was just
I know that was perfect. um, yeah, thank you both. That I think, Brian, you used the word sage advice. I think everything that you both just went through is so helpful for everyone on this call, whether we've got importers or brokers on the call. Just understanding all of this is so crucial to kind of getting through it and making sense of it. And yeah, so with that, I will shift a little bit and talk about bite because that's what I talk about. So let me go ahead and share a different screen here. All right. So for anyone on the call who is not a bike customer, I'm gonna walk through this pretty quickly, just in the for the sake of time. So if you have questions or want to go deeper on any of this, even if you are a bike customer, let me know. We can set up more time 101, one-on-one. But as Brian and Sandy just said, whether it's checking data before you submit it to CAPE or um, with all of the changes, just staying on top of last week's entries, right? So everything changes, you need to keep up with it. That's where we're really seeing what we've called the ACE analyzer coming in to effect as a really helpful tool. I know I've shown this a lot, and I've shown it in the context of CAPE and helping calculate IEPA refunds and potential IEPA refunds and auditing. But one thing that we are really seeing a lot of usefulness, so I wanted to highlight it quickly here, is just the ability to take last week's entries. You can set up the weekly report from ACE to get that emailed. You can pop that in here to Byte and set that up. So this is just obviously a sample data set here. I had 42 lines, only 5 entries last week, but running this through, I can quickly see, what has a flag. I'm missing a Chapter 99. I've got unexpected Chapter 99s. I've got tariff tool review. So from these, I can look at these flagged items. I can start clearing out any findings. So we'll mark this one as cleared. It doesn't need to be reviewed. And what's really helpful, and I think this was feedback from Sandy, maybe even, and that's not even why I'm showing it, but you can actually export this table now. So these are my flagged entries. This is what I need someone to go and look at from last week. So you can export this table to a CSV. It opens up like this, and now you have a list of the entries with the line numbers that need review and why. So you can send this back to whoever in your operation needs to review these entries, take a closer look, and make any changes or determine, changes don't need to be made. So again, just trying to make that kind of audit process a little bit easier, a little bit more straightforward. So if every week you just start your week with the review of last week, especially on a week like now when things are changing and dates matter more than ever, and you just need to make sure that everything went through as it was supposed to. Doing this as like a weekly or a monthly activity, we're seeing a lot of benefit and just kind of less time on task, but more efficient auditing and more comprehensive auditing. So just wanted to point that out. It doesn't always have to be about IEPA or CAPE. You can use this as a weekly audit tool. Secondly, the tariff analyzer tool. So after you've audited your last week's entries, you can actually take all of those and run through the same codes through for this week, right? So last week, these were all my entries. If I did the same entries this week or today, I should speak by days. If I did this today, this is what my tariff would be. So I still have my 42 codes that I had on that previous entry. I've got my total value and my total duty. So I can now see any changes. I can look and see what the entry would be if it were today, open this up, see the breakdown, and so on. So this is initially we set it up thinking people would maybe want to use it in like a bulk. We've got a container coming in, but we're really seeing a lot of use on this tool around this concept of like modeling or just understanding the impact of tariffs, as they're changing and being able to do that rapid analysis of this is what the impact is going to be. So to that point, we've now launched a tool that marries these two together. So now that you have your historical ACE data from last week and you need to understand what your modeling would be this week, you can now come to, it's in workflows, it's called reports. And here, these are just some samples, but I can say duty spend by country. Let's see. I want to compare my duty spend by country from my ACE report to my tariff analyzer. So you can put in whatever prompt you have here. It tries to understand your request. And then over here on the right, it's showing all my data sources. So what these are showing are the different ACE runs that I've done, different tariff modeling that I've done, and it's pulling directly from my account. So I want to show my ACE report, that weekly audit that I did, and my tariff modeling on the same data and attach those. And it takes just a minute, but what it does is run through and pull out and compare. So by country, I'll get an audit of what it was, what I spent in my ACE ES003, and now what I'm expecting as of today based on today's tariffs. And it's doing the math a lot faster than I would. So now down here below, I have my countries here. I have my total. So in my ACE data, last week I paid 38,000. And I will say the dates for last week were not really last week. That was last month, just for dramatic effect here, but gives you an idea here. So we get 38,000. Now my projected duty is 40. I have my delta, so I can see now I'm going to be spending $1,700 more on those same products. So again, just quick kind of answers here. In talking to a lot of our customers, we're hearing from brokers that they're getting asked questions like this more than they used to. And not only do you have more to do now as brokers, but now you're being asked to do different analysis like this that traditionally wasn't a big ask for you. So we are trying to build out additional tools to help you get to these answers a little bit faster. Finally, I just want to show, I know we've talked a lot about our Byte product database. Gonna not save that. So we have a product database. I know a lot of brokers or importers have some kind of product database or Excel document or your ERP, or whether it be CargoWise or NetCHB or any of those others. They may have product databases in there. What we're finding is that, for example, you can go through and you can put your HTS code on a product, and then you have to manually pick which Chapter 99 codes stack on top of that. So every time there's this change, you have to go in and change those in your product database, and that's impossible at this point. So the integration that we're working on, and with that, we're doing kind of an overhaul of the design here, is the ability to pull your products out of wherever you have them stored, pull them into Byte. We use the term enrich. So we'll add the tariff codes, we'll add PGA flags, and then push it back into your system. So that way, if you pick your SKU, it will populate your tariffs per the stacking that Byte recommends according to that HTS. As I said, with that, we're giving the product database an overhaul in general to make it a little bit more obvious for all of you on your products. So rebuilding the compliance dashboard here, just trying to highlight exposure, PGA flags. A lot of questions came up recently on the CPSC, so bringing that to the forefront. And even on the product view, putting these flags right on this front page so you can see for each product the HS code and, if there's a PGA or if it's subject to 301, and really pulling that out for a quick view. On each of these as well, the ability to store some of that PGA information. So we'll still have all the product details, the tariffs like you've become used to, but then in addition to the customs flags, the actual ability to apply a PGA flag and then fill in the fields that are necessary on that product. So For FDA, we found there are 97 possible fields that you may need filled in. So rather than having to collect that information every time, being able to store that, look at it, and add elements, add compliance documents, and anything else. We want that to be easier for all of you so you can keep that in one place. So adding that in here. Brian, you're chuckling at me.
I'm just chuckling because I wonder if you have a comparison of which agency has the most potentially required fields.
I can get that for you. That'll be in our follow-up email.
Because
Trivia
when
fact.
I tell people sometimes like, hey, this one's 40 plus fields, now I can verify that.
Yes, you can. We will have all of those in here. So, yeah, just to say, if you have a product database and you need it to be working a little bit better, we are working with a few different software providers, vendors, to try to make sure that you can pull Byte, whether it be stacking data or tariff, PGA data, into your product catalogs over there. So if you have specific questions on that, please feel free to let me know and we can follow up directly. So just to close the loop on the demo side, as I said, starting the week with an audit in the ACE Analyzer, catch what you worked on last week, move forward, look at this week, figure out, what may be changing, being able to answer questions as they come up from customers, using the Tariff Analyzer, and then keeping all of your compliance needs and tariffs up to date in the product database. So that's kind of the loop that we're seeing work really well. Again, if you have any questions, let me know. I'm going to stop sharing there now because I know there are likely many questions. That's the end of our prepared material. I'm going to put the reshare this and put the NEI information here on the screen, just so that everyone has it. Again, we'll share this through email with the recording, but it looks like we do have a few questions coming in here. So I'll start at the top and go through them in the order they were received, and we'll see in the next 7 minutes or so how many we can fit in. So first question, CAPE was filed for a foreign IOR with no U.S. bank account. 4811 data was entered into ACE, but not tied to the entry summary. Since the entries are liquidated now, PSC is no longer an option. What options does the foreign IOR have besides opening a U.S. bank account? I'm going to defer to Sandy or Brian on that one.
So Customs has published, and I can get you the link, how to obtain a rejected refund, right? So the refund will reject and it'll sit and wait for you to take action. If it is a foreign account and the 4811 is verified to be on that account, the instructions are, as I understand them, and it's worked for us, the importer still has to get an ACE account, and that trade account owner for that company emails the instructions to ask that that refund be refunded to the 4811 party. So they
Yeah,
will have to, go ahead, Brian.
I was just gonna say, so my understanding is exactly the same, and I will say that we've had success with it, in working with importers who are non-resident importers. Um, I think most of them have been re-triggered within 6 to 8 weeks.
Yeah.
Once the request has been made. So Sandy's spot on, right? Once the ACE information is added, follow the instructions from the trade account owner to request CBP reinitiate the refund, and then within 6 to 8 weeks, that's what we've been seeing as far as delivery.
Yep, and I'll send you Ann the link to those instructions.
Perfect, thank you. Next, Anne, would it be possible to add the census reporting information on Byte check tariff tool? I don't see why not. We're very open to including anything that's kind of helpful for all of you. Um, yeah, I think I'd have to ask just a few follow-up questions there on what the requirement is. So it's an anonymous ask, but feel free to send me an email and we can go back and forth on that. And yeah, we can help get your questions answered there. In the check tariff tool, is there an option to add Chapter 98 codes into the tariff stacking output? Currently, there is not. We are working on including improved Chapter 98 logic, being able to include that in the stacking output. Also on the including Chapter 98, better Chapter 98 logic in the ACE analyzer as well. A few other things that have come up that are kind of pending requests that we haven't forgotten about but have on our roadmap. Uh, Qualified industrial zones, value exchange rate type issues on the tariff tool. We ask for value in US dollars, and a few others. For the most part, we do try to track upcoming changes on the various Notion pages. I will put a link to those again in our follow-up email. Um, I do update those. Anything, if you're ever wondering what's kind of on the forefront of what's coming next, in addition to all of the tariffs, but from a bite perspective, we do track all of that there. And also, we are very transparent as we fix any bugs in the platform. Those are also listed as recently fixed. If you send me something, you'll usually see that pop up there and then show up in the recently fixed.
I will say I just had this conversation with someone internally, right, about the 98 potential, right? Because that certainly is one that I think trade would find useful for sure. Whether that's even just a toggle, right?
Yeah. Yep. Okay.
Yeah, I put the link in the chat, but I think it only went to you for the refund.
Yes, it looks like it went to hosts and panelists. I will post it again to everyone here. Um, And then in the final 2 minutes here, if any other questions come in, great. I also wanted to just say thank you again, Sandy and Brian. Can't thank you enough for all of your support for the whole trade community and to Byte, and really appreciate you both taking the time to speak today, and to all of the participants for joining. Thank you. I know it's busy times, and we feel very grateful to have this community around Byte, and hope that we can continue to provide useful sessions to you.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, our pleasure. Always great to partner with great partners.
All right. Well, then I will give everyone a minute back, and I hope you all enjoy your afternoons. Thank you very much.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.